about the GitHub repository, why it is important, and how you can make an ideal one for you. So myself, Arpit Jan, and I'll be taking you through this session. I'm working as a senior member of the data science team in Ericsson. So let's start. So before proceeding further, I would actually like to give you a brief intro about myself, like from where I started my journey, what I have done, and where I am currently. Right. So I started my journey in 2013. I graduated from Satyabama University, Chennai, in electronics and communication engineering. I was, I would say, always a kind of good student in the college, and with God's grace, I was the silver medalist of my university, and I was one of the students who got placed from the university and in the campus placements, and I joined Wipro Technologies as my first organization in 2013 itself as a project engineer. When I started my journey, I was a junior administrator there, and I started my clientele with one of the pioneer banking client from UK at that time, and as I mentioned, I was junior administrator there. So I worked there for some time, and then I realized that there are a couple of things which actually excites me. I wasn't really working on analytics at that time, and eventually, in the course of my work tenure, I figured that there is definitely something called as analytics, which is booming up, and kind of people trying to explore at that time. Although I didn't get an opportunity to work on my job profile on the exact role, but I did some online study about it, and then that's from where I developed my interest. And there were some other teams who were involved in the analytics profile, so I got some idea from them as well. And I did some online study, and that's where I realized the real potential of analytics domain. And that's when, after 2.5 years, I made my first switch, and I jumped into IBM. That's where I felt that I need to widen my horizons, and that's where IBM was giving me the right platform. I joined them as a senior analyst there in the cloud domain. I was mainly working into requirement analysis and virtual machines delivery. And then when I joined IBM, I realized that there are a lot of other things which actually can be done on data analytics. And I figured the real potential of analytics domain. I was there for around some time in IBM, around 2 years. That's where I left it. And then I joined Michelin India Private Limited. It's one of the biggest tire giants in Europe. And I joined Michelin as a data scientist in the research and the development team in 2017. So my role there was to work on different set of tires as such, and try to understand what kind of tires would be the right fit for different market. And then there were definitely other use cases related to my tire performance, my tire market industries, and then A/B testing. A lot of other things involved there, and then there were a few use cases on deep learning side as well. So I was there in Mission for around 2 years. That's where I figured that now I'm standing at some other level. And during the course of my mission as well, where I felt that although I was working in the industry, I need to know the core basics of what I'm doing. Although I was working as a data scientist there, but I felt that I am lacking somewhere in my core concepts, and that could be really good for my overall profile. And that's where I felt that I need to understand and learn the core concepts of analytics. I started looking out for the opportunities I could get, and that's where I felt, and I came across the course curriculum in Great Lakes, which I felt would be the right fit for me at that time. So I joined Great Lakes while I was working for Michelin Tires in the same year 2017 itself. And I started my journey with Great Lakes. So I was working in the weekdays with Michelin, and the weekends I was going for my classes in Great Lakes. And the course got over in a time of an year or so. And the time was and that time I was still working with Michelin. I felt that after finishing the course, I definitely had something really good in myself, and I felt that I'm starting in some other level. I felt that I'm having some other skill sets which definitely can be used or utilized in some other way, and that's where I started looking out for the opportunities. And with that regard, in 2019, I got an opportunity to work with Ericsson as one of the senior members in the data scientist team. So I joined Ericsson in 2019, and I'm working with them since then. And uh, and as you can understand, as you can try to relate to my profile, I have been working in different domains altogether. So right now I'm in telecommunication industry, But before this, I was part of a banking domain, the finance sector. I was part of the cloud domain. I was part of the requirement analysis. Then I was also having exposure to the industrial area, the automobile section, where I was working with the Michelin tires. So I have seen different industries, and that's where I'm very confident of what I'm saying right now. It's like data is almost everywhere, and we have to realize the importance of data, right? So you should not be really worried about whether you are from mechanical background or from electronics background or from a chemical background. It all the only thing which you need is just a interest or your personal enthusiasm towards data. If you really can feel the data, because data is almost everywhere in every other industry. Being a data scientist, that's the beauty of it, right? So you can actually join any industry. The only thing which you have to look out for is like you need to have your own interest in the data manipulation or your data treatments, right? So if you can feel the data, if you can work on data, you can join any industry. Any industry is open for you, be it healthcare, be it telecommunication, be it automobile, mechanical, any industry, right? And at this point of time, every other industry has actually started realizing the I would say impact and the use of data, which was already there. I mean, till date, but they were not actually exploring those data, right? And now they have started to realize the real potential of data. So definitely, I would say this field, which where it's gonna give you a kickstart in your career, and then maybe you can join based on your own interest. Right. So as I mentioned, I'm working with Ericsson, and I'm still with them, and I'm like working on the use cases with the telecommunication industry now. Right. So that's a brief intro about myself, and then now let's try to understand about the today's agenda, which is about understanding what is the GitHub profile, right? Why people are talking about a GitHub profile? Because you might have realized that in the recent days, whenever you have gone for an interview, your interviewer might be asking for a GitHub profile, and you might be mentioning your GitHub repository link in your resume. So why do we do that? What is a GitHub profile? We'll try to understand that. And then at the next stage, we try to understand why GitHub is important, right? What exactly information does the GitHub possess, which actually helps you to get recruited, right? So we will try to understand the importance of GitHub. Who are the target audience? Who are benefited the most from GitHub, right? And by that, I does not mean that every person should not have a GitHub. It's always like you need to have a GitHub profile, but again, we need to prioritize like who are those people who will be benefited the most out of it, right? So we need to understand that point as well. And post that, we'll try to understand what are few do's and don'ts in your GitHub repository, what you are ideally supposed to do, and what definitely needs to be avoided, and what recruiters look for in a GitHub profile, right? Then maybe about an ideal format, I'll show you the snapshot of one of the ideal profiles. Like, I mean, definitely it's my perception of ideal. You can have another perception of your ideal repository, but I'm going to give you how exactly the core requirements of a GitHub profile should look like, what all important files it should have, so that it can be self-explanatory to the person who is going to look at your profile, right? And then at the end, we're gonna talk about few key lookouts, and then we'll try to understand how exactly what are the key outcomes of our discussion, right? So I'll be talking about few key outcomes, like how you can build your profile. What are the key things which you should look for, right? And post this, definitely we're gonna have a question and answer session, so you can post all of your relevant queries there. It could be related to your career transitions, opportunities, maybe about your GitHub profile, anything. So I'll be happy to take the questions there. Sounds good. Great. So let's move ahead and start with the first thing, and let's try to understand what is GitHub, right? Okay, so great. So first of all, you try to understand what is a GitHub. GitHub is nothing but a platform. It's an online platform which gives you a space, which gives you a kind of a platform where you can store or locate your work online, and it makes your work available to everyone, not only the recruiters. Maybe you can share it across with your team, within your organization, or you can keep it for yourself as a version control measure, or maybe just to store and save your information to look out for in the future, right? So it is an online platform which is giving you a space to store your work. And by work, I mean and it's not only limited to data science. So we are talking in context of data science, but GitHub is I would say, domain free. So it is actually majorly used by the software developers where they have the version controlling over them. So they keep this GitHub profile where they can store their work. Work is nothing but their coding expertise. They're coding the codes basically. So the codes they develop in the organization or they do it by themselves, they kind of store those work or the codes on an online platform. So we have understood that GitHub is nothing but a platform. Now the important thing is we need to understand how do we store these information? How do we store these codes? So now there's an important term called as repository, right? So repository is nothing but a directory, or you can maybe, for example, you're doing any problem statement, say loan prediction, or say or anything, any problem statement you're trying to solve. So that problem statement will be called as a repository or a directory, I would say, right? And in that directory, you're going to have certain X number of files, maybe a dependent file, maybe your direct code, maybe your utility functions, right? So a repository is nothing but a directory on the platform on which you're going to store your work, and work are nothing but your codes, right? So GitHub is not more than an online repository where you are storing your codes to make it visible, majorly for your recruiters, and then maybe for your online references as well, right? Now let's try to understand how exactly GitHub usage is different, right? So I would broadly classify in terms of an organizational use and a personal use, right? So organizational use of GitHub is slightly different to what we use in a personal way. I'm going to highlight some key points here, right? So as I mentioned, so in organizational perspective, GitHub is exclusive domain of the software developers. And by that, I mean that the software developers are those people who are actually developing the application updates, I would say, on every other day, right? So they are working on their codes and they are storing their codes. If they keep in on their local system, definitely there's a high chance of getting it lost if there is a hardware crash on your system, right? So they cannot keep it on the system. It is all dependent on your, this is all an asset of your organization. And every organization has their own GitHub repository, which is actually locked, and they use it in terms of their version control. So every day, whenever my developer is developing something, that will be my version 1. And the next day, if the same thing has an update in the code, so it'll be like marked as version 2, or maybe 1.2 or 1.1, whatever versioning control they want to use it as. And whatever codes we push on the Git repository will be having a version on it. So in the future, if the developer wants to go back to the previous version, like 1.1 or version 1, so they can definitely go back and check on the previous versions. So GitHub is giving me an online platform for the software developers where they can use the data or the codes in form of a version controlling, right? And definitely now in the next, we have the usage of sync within the team. Like for example, I would say there are 10 number of people working within the team on a particular application, and each of these 10 people has 10 different kind of roles in the same project. For example, one would be developing a function to fetch the data, and then another would be working on treatment of the data, and the other person would be working on maybe some other work. So there are different teams. There are different people within the team who are actually working on the same project. And what we can do is they have this in GitHub repository. We have a very good feature of master and branches, right? So a particular project can have a master repository, and based on that, they can have subdirectories, like just like we do in our local systems. Like we have a folder, and in each of these folder we can have number of folders where we can have different set of files. For example, if I'm just storing my movies, right? So I have a movie folder, which is my parent directory. And under the movies folder, I have 10 more directories, maybe a Hindi movie, an English movie, an animated movie, something like that, right? So I'm going to have another sub branches within my master directory for individual members of my team. And my individual members will be pushing the codes in their respective branches, not on the master code. And once all of the branches are pushed with my updated codes, I'm gonna combine them on maybe push one of the ideal thing in my master directory. So master will be my industrialized version. So GitHub repository or GitHub is actually providing me a space or an online repository where we are storing an information within the team on an online platform. Also, it helps the coders who are working in silos, right? So there would be an individual contributor in the team, like who has been given the task to work on a particular project. So instead of him going and we're doing the talking thing to all of the respective members, he's just pushing his codes to the respective directories where it is visible to the entire organization or maybe within the team, right? So that individual contributor person can actually push their codes online on the GitHub repository and then make it visible to other people from where it can be deployed to the production environment. And as I was mentioning, GitHub actually provides us a very beautiful concept of master and branch coordination. So a single project can have multiple teams working on the same project, or we can have multiple clients on a single use case. For example, if I'm working on, say, loan prediction, so loan prediction as a use case can be deployed or can be can be given to multiple vendors. It be for company A, company B, company C. So we can have multiple branches within my master repository, which is for the loan prediction, and it can be sold to company A, B, and C. So we can have our respective individual branches for individual companies. And based on that, we can have the slight modifications there on the codes based on the profile of the companies and whatever respective hardware we have usage there. Right. So those are about the few key points on how GitHub is used in more of a organizational way, I would say. Now, talking about my personal usage, why GitHub is important, how we can use GitHub in more of my personal way, right? Like, for example, if I want to enrich my skill set, how we should use GitHub in a most appropriate way, right? In that case, again, I'm going to highlight a few things there. So first and the foremost thing, how GitHub is giving me a personal benefit is like it is giving me a platform where we can highlight our hands-on coding experience, because as I mentioned, GitHub is mainly to store our online work, our work, which is nothing but my codes. So it is giving me a platform where we can highlight our hands-on experience on the codes, right? On the use cases I have worked on, and it could be multiple use cases. So we can highlight our different variety of problems we have solved on the online platform. So we can have multiple projects there on the GitHub repository where we can highlight an exposure to a different kind of use cases, right? And it gives me the coding visibility, definitely our coding standards, our way of coding things. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to be a data scientist, coding is important, right? So your everyday work will be based on coding. But again, you need to understand that being a data scientist, the coding expectation is slightly different from a software developer, right? So we have to be a little smart there and get our things done, right? But again, it does not mean that our code should be really messy, because at the end of the day, you're not making the code for yourself, you're making the code for the business, right? And you have to get it deployed if you want to make the business get the use out of it for the business, right? So you have to get it deployed in the live production environment. So your code should be crisp and clear and efficient, right? So in this way, you can actually highlight your coding skill sets in more of a professional way, in which you have experience or you have expertise on different kind of use cases on an online platform. Right. So definitely on online, if you want to show, it's always ideal to have different set of projects from different domains of data science. For example, you can pick one from NLP, you can pick one from classification, one from regression, right? So you can build your profile so that you can showcase your varied experience in different set of problem statements, right? So it's always better to have a hands-on experience where you can showcase your coding visibility in terms of your project's exposure. So you can pick multiple projects, and but again, there are a few if and buts there, which I'll be talking on in my next slides. So my ideal objective is my GitHub profile is giving me a visibility for my hands-on coding experience. So you need to realize the fact that it is actually helping you to showcase your coding skills, because these days, whenever the recruiter look for your profile, they actually want you to work on the ground, right? So because at the end of the day, you're joining the organization, you have to work on the ground, and if you want to get your hands dirty, it is basically on Python, or maybe in any other organization the company is working in. Majorly it's Python these days. So you need to understand that at the end of the day, you have to code and you have to showcase your coding skills as well, and GitHub is giving you that visibility where the recruiters can find what kind of skill sets do you possess in terms of coding. Okay. Great. So now let's try to understand, why is GitHub important, right? Is it the only thing, or what kind of other things do we also look out for, right? So first and the foremost question, how does it help? So as I mentioned, GitHub is giving me an exposure to my coding and coding experience only, right? So it is only giving me my visibility towards the coding. So it is giving my project exposure to kind of problem statements I have solved. It is giving me an exposure or visibility in terms of how how I formulate or how I strategize my coding standards, right? So it is giving the visibility for my codes to so that the recruiter can understand that whether I'll be able to do the job or the kind of formulation I have in my coding standards. So the GitHub is giving me that particular exposure where I can showcase my skill sets in coding. So that is one of the key important thing in GitHub. And then you to understand that, but again, you need to understand my GitHub is only giving me exposure to my Python skill sets, which is my coding standards, right? And now the next important thing is who needs it the most, right? So there are two gentry of people who actually needs it the most and who will be benefited out of the most if we have the good GitHub profile, right? These are the fresher people, so who actually are freshly graduated from the organizations, from the institutions, and they're looking for jobs, or the person who are looking for switching their profile, who are maybe having some X amount of work experience, and then you're trying to make a switch in the data science profile, or respective to any different profile, right? But let's talk to the data science context. So in that case, I would say yes, freshers who are freshly graduated and the people who are trying to make a switch in their career. So they need it the most, and they'll be benefited from it out of the most. So they definitely need to have a good GitHub profile. And I'll be talking about how we can make an ideal one as well. Right. But again, now the most important thing which you need to understand is that GitHub is not your resume, right? GitHub is just an additional help for your resume where you're showcasing your hands-on experience on Python, but it cannot be replaced with your resume, right? So your resume is giving your overall holistic view of a profile, but GitHub is giving you an exposure towards your hands-on experience. So mixture of these two gonna give you an ideal profile. You cannot replace your GitHub with your resume. So GitHub is just an additional support for your resume, right? So now let's try to understand what are the few key things which GitHub does not really provide, right? So we'll try to understand what GitHub is not helping you with. So what GitHub is not giving you in your candidature, and what the recruiters look out for in the GitHub profile when they actually check it, what they have in their background, right? The first and the foremost thing you need to understand that it is data science is beyond coding, right? So it is not only coding. First of all, you need to have an analytics mindset. So before jumping into code, if you don't know the logic of what you're doing, you cannot really code, right? So even for searching on Google, you need to understand that what you are going to search, right? You cannot just simply tell Google to please code it for me. You cannot do it like that, right? You should know the logics of it. So data science is beyond coding. You need to have a 360-degree view on your data set. You need to have the analytics mindset. You need to have the right thought process to think about the problem. Like for example, you need to have eye for the details. You need to have a good visualization skills. You need to have a good mindset to understand the data descriptions, right? So there are a lot of small things which you need to have, which is actually you're building up your analytics mindset. And coding is beyond that, right? So you can always first, if you have the analytics mindset, then you can think of coding. So it's not always coding. Coding is an additional support to your work, right? But again, that is also important. But it is not always coding based on which you'll be hired. So you have to think about the conceptual parts and how you can apply the concepts in the real business problems. That is through coding. So you have to realize the importance of both the things. Not only coding, it's a mixture of my conceptual understanding plus my coding standards. So the combination of these two gonna give you an ideal job, right? And the second thing, which is actually very critical in a GitHub resume, GitHub profile, is the authenticity of the problem statements or whatever things we're uploading, right? So you can understand it could be manipulative, right? It cannot be completely relied on. So there could be some unfinished projects, and there would be scenarios that it is not actually yours. You could have simply took it from your friend and then uploaded it for your on a GitHub profile, right? So the recruiters always look out for these things. They understand that it cannot be completely relied on, right? So although you have a very beautiful GitHub profile, you have mentioned 10 odd projects from different domains of data science, but still you can say that you're not getting selected because it's not the only way you can get selected, right? It's an additional support. So the recruiters know that the problem of manipulations. It's not always true for every other people, but yes, there are incidences where they have realized that there is a problem of authenticity, right? So which GitHub does not really. We cannot blindly rely on GitHub repositories directly, right? third important thing is my reasoning skill sets. So GitHub is not actually providing me the challenges which the candidate has faced while building those codes, right? So whenever you build any code, you face a lot of challenges. I mean, it's not a day's job, it's not an hour's job, right? It takes a time. I mean, it takes your honest effort to build any code for any problem statements, right? There are failure rates. You fail a lot of time, and then you make your final code. So GitHub is not actually giving you those I would say the challenges at time of coding, and on what circumstances you made those codes, and what kind of help you took, right? So these small details, your reasoning skills is not actually being provided by GitHub, right? And then the interpersonal skills. So as I mentioned that you cannot replace GitHub with a resume. So and at the same time you can understand that it is not giving you an interpersonal skill sets. So it is not actually providing you the team attitude or the interpersonal skills or maybe a communication skills you possess, right? So you need to understand that your GitHub is just an additional support. So you need to understand that these all behavioral aspects also plays an important role in your recruitment process. So you need to work on your team attitude, you need to work on your interpersonal skill sets, you need to know how to talk to people, then definitely your communication skills is going to be the utmost priority important thing where you can actually kind of confidently convince the other people with your whatever data science skills you possess, right? Which is not getting highlighted from your GitHub profile. Definitely at the end, I would highlight it actually misses out on the complete profile of a candidate, right? So it does not really provide you a role specific information. For example, there could be multiple roles you're applying to, and then at the end of the day in the GitHub you're going to have your projects section, right? So it does not really it is limited to roles. It's not giving me specific information to roles, limited exposures, and definitely a non-technical information like I was talking about your overall persona of being a candidate and working as a asset for an organization. It does not really give that. So GitHub, you need to understand, it's an additional support to your resume. It cannot be replaced by your resume, and you can understand that these five things which I discussed is actually is not available in your GitHub repository. But again, let's talk about how we can make an ideal repository, right? So I mean, for example, now I have to make I'm going to build my profile, or I'm going to build my own repository, a platform or where a directory where I should really post my important things, and I need to understand what kind of details it should have, right? Because as I mentioned that it's an additional support, but again it's an important thing to the people who are making a fresh recruitment, right? Who are attending who are freshly graduated, and the people who are making a switch recently to the data science domain. Then yes, for them GitHub repository is very, very important, right? So it plays an important role. They will benefit most out of it. So they need to understand, or in that case, I would say like most of the people who are working on their GitHub repository, they need to understand that what is an ideal repository, right? And what kind of details it should have in order to be more visible to the recruiters, right? So there'll be a lot of things which we should need to talk about. So for that, I would say first and the foremost important thing is the projects, right? So what kind of projects you want to really highlight on your GitHub repository. So be true to yourself, to be honest, and don't choose projects randomly just to showcase the. I mean, for example, I would say that don't simply write which you don't really know. Like for example, if you don't know how a face recognition works, don't simply put it up on a GitHub profile just to have a fancy project there, right? Be true to yourself and wisely choose projects from different domain. Yes, you need to have projects from different domain, but that does not mean that you cannot you can write anything you can want, right? So you cannot upload any codes, any random codes. So you, because at the end of the day you'll be asked questions from that. If you don't know, you'll be in a bigger trouble there, right? So always be true to yourself. Choose the projects in which you are most comfortable with, right? And in which you can actually give the real insights, because if you have worked on any problem statements, that is your asset. You know about that problem statements, right? I mean, definitely having a fancy project on GitHub helps, but if you cannot explain those projects, you'll be in a bigger mess, right? So it's always better to write to upload those projects in which you are most comfortable with, and be wise in choosing it from different domains, right? It's not always mandatory to choose the most difficult projects and most fancy projects all the time, right? You can even get your work done with a slightly simpler project in which you can explain your things very good. I mean, in a really good way, right? So that will help you in a better way. You need to understand, and you have to be true to yourself, right? And then the most important thing, you need to understand that you have to avoid using the most commonly used data sets. Like, for example, avoid writing projects related to your Iris data set, or maybe your empty cast data set, or maybe a Titanic data set, right? So these are the most commonly used data which is available online, right? So try to avoid most commonly used data sets and problem statements, right? So try to be little innovative there, and try to add those problem statements in which your true intent and your true I would say color should shine, right? That's the most important thing. You need to understand the importance of your projects. So if you want to highlight your work, so it should be kind of unique, and it should be presented in a smarter way, right? And definitely you have to avoid copying the contents from different repositories. So as I mentioned that, don't simply copy any project from any of your friends repository. For say, like, if your friend has written something on face recognition which is trending these days, so you cannot just simply copy those contents on your own repository, right? So that's not an ideal way, because there are chances that you'll be caught, and definitely it'll be troublesome for you that if you have not worked on your data set to explain it to the recruiters, right? Because at the end of the day, they can pick any project and they can ask you questions on that. So in that case, you'll not have the minute information. So you'll be having the information on the overall per se. I know that, but again, on a minute granular details, you might not be having exposure, because you have not worked on that project on yourself, right? So avoid copying the contents. That's not a good practice. So in short, I would say that selecting the project should be wise. You should choose the projects from different domains. That is definitely important. But again, be true to yourself. It's not always mandatory to choose the most difficult project. You can also get your work done in a smarter way by choosing slightly less difficult project, and then explain it in a really in a better way, right? So your code should be really good. Your graph should be really nice. So these small things really matter. So it's not always mandatory to have the most difficult projects, right? Then the important thing is you need to understand the problem statement, right? So you need to have clarity on your mission statement. What is the problem, and how you'll be what problem you're solving. So is it really word? So you need to understand, you need to have a real clarity on the process of what you are doing in your process, and then who is the target audience, right? So you need to understand that how exactly this use case is benefiting me, or maybe the others who are going to use this project. What is the use of this project, right? So that mission statement should have a proper clarity. And in that case, I'll tell you what would be the right format and the right contents of it. So in that case, when you'll be explaining about your project, you need to understand, you need to demonstrate that, okay, this is the reason why I'm doing this project, and this is how it will be useful, and this is how it can be used in the later stages, right? So you need to have a proper vision of why you're doing something, right? So that clarity should be there, right? And then the important thing is for an idle repository is your coding standards, right? So that is again very very important, because at the end of the day, you're pushing your codes to an online repository. So it should be really structured way of coding, right? You need to have your utility functions defined. You need to have the right definitions for your functions which you have written, and then definitely the code should be reusable, because the important thing which you need to understand is, like, whatever function, so for whatever problem we solve, right, in the coding we develop some user defined functions, right? So for those functions you need to write how exactly it is used. Maybe you can use a different utility Python file altogether, where you can define all your functions, and then make a small definition on all of those functions, how exactly it is used, what is my input, what is my output, and how does it process, basic information about your functions. And then you can write it in your utility Python files as well. And then you can call these utility function and make your code reusable on multiple regression files, so whatever prediction file you are generating. So it should be structured in a proper way, right? So we have your defined functions created separately. We have your prediction functions defined clearly, right? So you need to have a clarity on the process, right? So there should be a vision, or there should be standards. You need to adhere to the coding standards, right? So you cannot simply upload your Python notebook and then you can show, okay, I've done everything. No. So there has to be a proper way of doing things, right? So Your Python codes should be structured in a proper way, in a more of a professional way, right? And there has to be a definition of everything. There has to be, because if some other person is going to your code and try to understand what you've written, your code should be self-explanatory, right? So I mean, your job is to like not interfere on the other person's job, and not really helping the other person to understand your code, right? If you're involving yourself in explaining your code to other person, then your code is not actually adhering to the standard process, right? So your code should be self-explanatory, and it should be structured in a real processed way, right? Step 1, step 2, step 3, and then step n, right? It should be in a processed way. You have to adhere to the coding standards. That is very important. Okay, and then you have to also have the dependent files on your GitHub repository. So what do you mean by the dependent files? In this dependent file, I majorly mean my sample data and my utility functions, right? So by utility function, I mean that generally whenever you create any code for your problem statements, you actually create some your user defined functions, right? So the way we were discussing earlier. So try to have a separate function, try to have a separate Python file for all of your defined functions, and then you can call it in your main function, right? So and then you can have your sample data uploaded there. Maybe you can provide a link, or you can provide a sample data on which the person who is actually visiting your GitHub profile can test your codes, right? So that is actually very, very good. So these, you have to keep in mind these two things. You need to have the sample data, as well as you need to have your dependent utility functions defined, right? In a different in a proper way. It should be clear and distinct. Or definitely, if you have any configurable file, like any externally configurable file, if you're passing any external functions or any external variable or values, you need to have the configurable files as well, if any, right? And then the overall presentation of your repository, the overall layout, the names of your functions, the names of your Python files, the coding formatting, your presentation of your visual descriptors. So these small details are again plays an important role, right? So I'll show you the snapshot as well for an ideal repository. But before jumping to that, I would actually like to mention that you need to have a proper layout of your GitHub repository. So for every project, for every use case which you're gonna, I mean, for any business problem you're writing it on your GitHub profile, you need to understand that what kind of right information you need to upload it there. Like what are the right data types, what are the right information, what are the definitions of my function. So overall layout of my individual directories should be presented well. So adhering to all of these 5 points gonna give me an ideal repository for a particular project. And likewise, definitely you need to choose different projects as I mentioned. So be true to yourself there as well. Right. So key takeaways, 4 things I would like to highlight here. First is like always consider GitHub as an additional support to your resume, right? It's not a replacement to your resume. It's just an additional support. Always remember that, right? Because as we talked about few certain points which GitHub is not really providing to your resume or to your profile, right? So you need to use GitHub in a professional way to showcase your hands-on experience, right? And the other things gonna come from your interpersonal skill set in your resume where you'll be talking about yourself, right? Always be wise in choosing the projects. I want to really stress on this point. So don't really follow the practice of copying things from some other directory, or don't be scared that I don't have a fancy project in a resume. I'm only writing loan prediction. I'm only writing churn prediction in my GitHub profile, which is used by every other person. It's fine. It's okay. Be true to yourself, right? It's not good to write something which you don't know. You trust me, you are in a bigger trouble then, right? So always be smart and wise in choosing the projects. Yes, if you have solved different kind of problem statements, it's always better to write different kind of problem statements in your GitHub directory. But if you have not solved, it's not an ideal thing to copy something and then try to upload something which you're not aware of, right? For the sake of it, don't do it. Okay. Then the most important thing is structurizing your directory in a professional way, right? So what kind of right dependent files, what is the right names of my files, and then what are the definitions of my individual functions. So try to be professional in your approach. Try to write things in which the other person can really understand, right? So your directory, your repository, your functions, everything should be self-explanatory. So I mean, just try to read your things from a third person eye, right? Try to understand that whether you are able to understand from a third person view. then yes, you are adhering the process. If not, then you have to work on your things and you have to make it in a professional way, right? And at last, definitely you have to maintain the standards as in there are certain coding standards, as I was mentioning that let's have a separate utility function defined, let's have my definitions for my functions depend, and let's have a process, let's have a clean code in which I can say that okay, this is my step 1, step 2, step 3, and then this is my step n, right? So it should be processed code, it should be crisp, and it should be clear. At the same time, it should be efficient. If you can solve something by apply lambda, don't use a for loop there, right? So it's like a basic example. So like try to be smarter and try to be efficient in your codes, right? Try to use something which you feel that is an efficient way of doing a problem. You can solve any problem by n number of ways, right? But again, try to be efficient and smart in writing the codes and maintain the standards of the coding, right? So that is one of the key thing again which the recruiters which look for on your hands-on experience. Right, and now at last, I'm going to show you one sample directory, but again, this definition could be different from some other people, right? So don't simply blindly follow this. But again, I'm going to highlight few of the key things which you should have in an ideal repository, right? So here, if you can see here, I have 4 different Python functions: annotate, assemble, predict, and settings, right? And then on top of that, I have two more files: a README file and the requirements.txt, right? Why we are having so many files? Because if you do something on Jupyter Notebook, you can only have a single notebook and upload it there. You can get your work done. No, but that's not how you do it in a standard way, right? So whenever we upload something, we need to have a clarity on individual tasks, right? And each individual task ideally should have a different function or a different file altogether. Like for example, here my objective is the annotate is giving me the descriptors of all the EDAs which I have done. So whatever problem I solved, right? So I would have done some EDA. So if I run this function, I'm going to generate all the respective graphs, and it'll be exported to individual PNG or the JPG files, and it'll be getting saved in my whatever directory I'll be running it, right? So that's about my annotate. And for my assemble part, I'm going to do all the data treatment which I have done. Like for example, I would have done some missing value treatment, I've done some outlier treatment. Your anything apart from your EDA, like your to the data process, the pre-processing part, right? So your data wrangling part will be in there in my assemble part. You're going to assemble my data for the modeling, and then I am going to have the predict function, predict data. So predict will take the output from the assemble.py, and it will take the data and then do the predictions on my test data set, right? And then I have my settings function, settings.py, which is nothing but my all the utility functions defined in there. So whatever user defined functions, I'm going to use it in a separate Python file, which will be called either in my annotate or my assemble.py, right? So I have a clear, distinct, separate files for all the different tasks I have in my data science project, right? And then on the README file, I'm going to have a description of my project, and as well as on my individual files. I can have a readout for my individual files. So I'm going to have a definition for my annotate py, what it does, what it takes, what it produces, where it does, all of those small things. And then if you can notice here in the README file, it's just a loan prediction data set in which we have given the data, we have given the location to download the data as well, right? And then the few installation step, how we can download the data. Just the basic input of my it's basically a readme file. It should be self-explanatory. It should be giving a brief readout to your reader who is actually visiting your profile and try to understand what those individual file mean, right? Ideally should be self-explanatory, but again, you need to have a proper readout documented in a readme md file, right? So you can have ideal. It is always good to have a README file where we can explain about your work, why you're doing it, what are the dependent files, what are these individual files mean, and what is the input and output individually, right? So just a brief a note to my problem statements and the individual files which you're using, right? The requirement txt generally contains all the dependent libraries we take. I mean, again, it's not always mandatory that if you're using certain libraries, for example, scikit-learn or some other library, maybe Cbond, and the person who actually going to use your code is having the Cbond installed in his system, right? It's not always mandatory. So it's always good to have the requirements txt defined explicitly so the person can have all the dependent libraries installed in their own system if they need to run your code, right? So requirements TSC is nothing but describing your dependent libraries which you're using in your codes. It could be in annotate, it could be in assemble, it could be in settings, wherever you're calling any function, right? So you need to describe your dependent libraries which you are using in the codes. So ideal way is to have all those libraries with the correct version mentioned in the requirements txt. Right. So I hope I made myself clear. And I mean, if you follow this kind of structure, I mean, definitely your problem statements could be different. And if you follow this kind of structure, definitely it will add value to your profile, and you'll be adding value to your own repository, right? So it's always good to have a clear and distinct files uploaded on the system. Right. So that's it about from my side about the descriptions. I'll be more than happy to take questions, if any.
Hi, Arpit. So am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, Nimisha.
Yeah, all right. Okay. So, all the viewers out there who have any relevant queries, please post their queries on the chat section. We haven't got enough queries. So, everyone, please post your relevant queries. So, I have some few viewers who have asked some queries. I'll go with the first question. So, the first question is from Ananya. Ananya wants to know, does GitHub support only Python or all other languages?
Okay, it's a good question, Anya. So GitHub is, as I mentioned, it's mainly used by the software developers. So GitHub has no dependency on any language as such. So we can have any kind of languages codes to be could be pushed in GitHub repository. So it is not dependent on Python. So you can have any set of coding language as your preference to be used in the GitHub repository. So no dependency there.
Okay. So the next question is from Deepak Vyas. He wants to know, should we mention all the projects in one repository or should it be in different repositories?
Okay, great, good question. So your repository is nothing but by your name. So if I say my name is Arpit, so I'm going to have one repository on my name, right? So Arpit is my repository name, and under this repository, I'm going to have multiple projects, multiple individual subdirectories in which I'm going to have different projects there. So as I was mentioning that you can have one simple plain directory, which is your major repository, which is on your name, and then inside that you can have multiple projects for different use cases. So you can have one project for loan prediction, one project for your classification, and some other problem statement which you are solving, right? So one repository on your name, and then further subdirectories for your individual use cases.
All right. So the next question is from Native. How to take push requests from GitHub so that anyone can change the code?
Okay. Okay, so if you want to make your code editable, so it's just like you have to make your codes visible to everyone, right? So and definitely if you made your code available to everyone, so they can go there and they can download it and they can push it as well. So that there should not be any problem there. So if it's just like you have to make your repository visible online to everyone. So you have to unrestrict your directory, and then you can make your changes. You can make your directory editable. You can do that.
All right. So the next question is from Deepika Venkat. I'm from chemical engineering background. How can I utilize GitHub in my resume?
Great. Okay. So as I was mentioning, so first you need to understand why we are using GitHub, right? So we are using GitHub to demonstrate your coding hands-on experience, right? And GitHub, as I mentioned, cannot be replaced by a resume. So your objective to use GitHub is to have to give yourself a platform where the recruiters can understand what kind of expertise you hold in terms of your coding standards, right? So in that case, you need to mention that what all projects you have worked on in your resume, and use your GitHub directory to have the same project which you have mentioned on your resume for their live code. So whatever work you have done, whatever hands-on you have done in the problem statement, maybe your EDA, maybe your prediction statement, your models, everything, right? So you mention that details on your resume and upload the same information, the same files which you have used, the same codes adhering to the standards which we discussed on the GitHub profile. So you're going to use your GitHub directory to demonstrate your hands-on experience on coding. So use the similar ideal ways to use the same similar projects or the same project which you have mentioned in your resume. So you're going to use GitHub for your, a platform to demonstrate your hands-on experience in coding. So that should be your lookout.
All right. So the next question is from Bhanu. He wants to know, is it important to do docs information because he has experience in some development?
Nimisha, I think I did not get the question. So is it like, is it important to write the document for the problem?
Yes, exactly. He wants to know, is it important for the document for any project that he's
Okay,
mentioning in
got it.
GitHub?
Got it. Yes, I mean that's again a very good question. So I myself, I would say, I lack sometimes on writing the right documents on time. But again, trust me, if you have done something, you need to have the documents handy with you. If your codes, if a repository is not self-explanatory, you're not doing a good job to yourself, and definitely your use cases or your problem statements will not be useful for the other person because whatever you're doing is in your own mind, right? And you have done it on yourself. It's not mandatory that the other person who is looking out to your project knows about those minute details, right? So you cannot simply assume it. And how you can make sure that the other person actually realizes the fact which you are going through, then you have to document it. So documentation actually helps you to give your use case or the problem statements, I would say, a proper visibility in terms of the complexities or the objective statement it is having on ground, right? So documentation, yes, it is very very important, and for whatever problem or use cases you upload it on GitHub, right? So you need to have a proper document as well. So as I was showing that the README file, it is giving you. I'm not saying that you need to write everything in there, right? But again, at least a basic document to explaining about what is the problem statement, what is the input, what is the output, how the data looks like, some brief descriptor of my variables, and then definitely talking about my dependent Python files, right? So I mean, make your repository talk to the visitor in itself, right? So it should be self-explanatory. So the objective of writing the documents is like to make your repository or the use case self-explanatory. But again, to answer it short, yes, it is important.
All right. So the next question is from Aishwarya. Aishwarya wants to know how to start pushing projects starting today. I am a UG final year graduate. Can we upload small projects like creating a calculator or a password validator?
That's again a very beautiful question. So, Ashwara, if you remember, when I was talking that you have to be smart and you have to be true to yourself, right? And I clearly mentioned it's not always mandatory to have the fanciest project on GitHub. No, not really, because the important thing is it's your own thing. You have to own your GitHub directory, right? So because it's about your own expertise. It could be that you have an expertise on a loan prediction model. It could be expertise on your generating a calculator. It's fine. It's totally fine. You have to be confident and you have to be true to yourself. So writing even the smallest project on and uploading it on pushing it on GitHub repository is not at all a problem. You need to showcase whatever you have worked on, and you have to be true to yourself, right? And trust me, like if you start pushing something which you don't know, at the end of the day you might be asked to explain those projects, and then you'll be in a bigger trouble, right? So always be true to yourself, and you have to be confident in whatever things you are doing. It's just like you have to adhere to certain standards. Like when I was mentioning that you cannot simply upload a Jupyter notebook on a GitHub repository, right? So it should be adhering to the standards. And if you feel that your work is adhering to the standards, it has the right definitions in place, then yes, why not? You can push whatever things you want to do. It should be having a proper, clear, distinct message. What is the problem statement? How you are solving it? A small note for your problem statement, like a README file, and then you can definitely upload it. It's not at all a problem.
All right. The next question is from Manjushri. She wants to know, I'm pursuing PhD in statistics and I want to transmit my career academic to data scientist. Can GitHub project help to get my job? She wants to know basically, is GitHub projects more relevant for getting a job into data science?
Okay. So the first thing you need to understand that whenever you are making a career switch, it's not really mandatory that your previous work experience is in vain. No, it's not like that. But again, you need to understand that whatever domain you're going to make your career switch, for example, in this case, data science, then your relevant data science content will be what the recruiter will be looking for in your GitHub profile, right? So they will not be looking for any chemical branch expertise there because it does not really make sense for them. They will be looking out for your expertise in data science coding in that case, right? So in that case, if you want to make a switch, definitely GitHub is actually giving you the platform where the recruiters can find your hands-on expertise on coding. So definitely in that case, yes, coding would be important, and your profile will be benefited from whatever problem statements you write on your GitHub profile. But again, as I was mentioning earlier, it is not mandatory to have the fanciest project on your on a GitHub profile. It is always required. It is always good to have those projects where you have your own expertise, where you can actually confidently own the problem statement, right? That is I mean, that is it's actually more important than writing something which you don't know. So always true to yourself. Then yes, if you're making a switch, in that case, GitHub profile actually adds on to your, I would say, gives you the visibility towards your coding. So your conceptual part is what you're going to answer in the interview, and then your hands-on experience, which might not be, immediately judged in the interview part, they can simply go back to your GitHub profile and they can understand your coding standards. So yes, in that case, it will give you the platform. It will be helpful for you. But again, be smart and be wise to yourself, and then choose the projects in which you are most comfortable with. But again, definitely you need to have the GitHub profile in that case, and it will add value to your profile and candidature in terms of recruitment.
All right. So the next question is from Nitin. Why some people have a pro icon on their GitHub profile? Is this due to they have any advanced programming knowledge?
Not really. I mean, I would not say that they have an advances, but they are more active, and they have multiple projects in which even the GitHub has recognized that. So it's not mandatory that they are more skilled than you. So skill, I mean, there might be a person who is not uploading anything and is more skilled than the other person, right? So it's not mandatory that the person, if is at the pro mode in GitHub, they have higher skills in terms of coding. It just simply means that they're more active in terms of uploading their projects, right? So don't get worried about that. It's just like they are uploading, they are more active to they are more active in uploading their use cases there. It's just like that. So it's not mandatory that they are more skilled, but again, definitely more active means they are into the data science projects and they are doing something. But skilled is what you can judge by yourself. It could be different. It could be the ratings could be different from different person, right? So it's not mandatory that having a pro mode defines me having a better skills in data science coding. No, it's not like that. It's just like they're more active. So you can be more active in uploading your projects, and you can have a version control there as well. So you can try to push the use cases, as many use cases as you want, and then definitely that will help.
All right. So the next question is from Nirupama Datta. Is it compulsory to store the complete project, or can we store some incomplete projects that can be completed in the future in GitHub?
Okay, so that's again a very good question. So that is a bit tricky. So I mean, again, if you are using your GitHub profile for any recruitment drive, then having an incomplete profile is not really good. But again, it depends on the the recruiter as well. Like when I take interviews, I don't really I mean, for me, it's not at all a problem. I understand that some use cases might not be finished at the time of recruitment, but you need to have a proper justification for that. So it depends on the interviewer, and it depends on your own justification. So you can or cannot have. So it's not like if you write it, it'll be a bigger problem. No, it's not like that. You can still have a proper justification for it, and you can mention that in the readme file that this is what you have done till date, and this is what your file. I mean, you cannot upload a Python notebook, I mean your Jupyter notebook there, right? So you need to have at least something which is valid, and which is, I mean, telling you that okay, you have done till this step, okay, this step is remaining, right? So you need to have a proper descriptors of your whatever files you're uploading there, and then you have to be true to yourself again, right? So you cannot just I mean, as I mentioned, you cannot simply upload a Jupyter notebook there. So try to make it in a processed way, and try to have a proper note for what you have done till date, and what are the further plans, and how you are going to overcome the things which has not been done yet. So definitely you can have it, but try to add a proper justification in your readme file or whatever note you are writing there, in a proper in a professional way, that you have done this and some XYZ things are remaining, and this is what you plan to do. So a proper note would be fine if you add your unfinished project as well. So that should be fine.
All right. So thanks, Arpit. I think it's already time for winding up the session for today. So I'm sure that all the viewers and all the learners must have found this session very insightful and encouraging, especially since this was a session that we took from the viewers' request, because they all wanted to know regarding GitHub. So I'm sure that they must have found this session very helpful. Also, I would like to know what do you feel, what is your opinion, or what is your suggestion to the viewers and the students out there? Is it mandatory to mention GitHub in their resume, or if they are mentioning also, how beneficial it would be in related to getting a job in the data science field?
Great. Yes. So definitely, as I was mentioning, that GitHub is actually, but it will be most benefited by those who are either freshly graduated from the universities, or who are trying to make a switch to the data science domain. Because in those scenarios, the recruiters does not really know, right, what kind of hands-on expertise do they hold in terms of coding. Because they might be able to answer a few conceptual questions in the interview, but at the end of the day, they have to work on the codes as well. They have to code each and every day. So in those scenarios where the person don't have a relevant work experience, in definitely having a GitHub profile is a must. So this is from where they will be, I mean, the recruiters will be analyzing your hands-on expertise in coding, because coding is important in data science, right? So yes, in that case, coding would be important, and definitely trying to understand the importance of it. It is actually very, very important for those people definitely who are freshly graduates, because I mean, they have to demonstrate their hands-on exercise on coding, right? So it could be from multiple projects, it could be from adhering to standards. So there are certain key things which you have to look out for, but definitely having a good and ideal format of my GitHub profile gonna have an additional value to my resume. So again, as I was mentioning, that it's not always mandatory to have the fanciest projects in on GitHub. It's always important to have those projects in which you have actually done something. Then you can actually explain in the interviews, right? So let's be wise there, and let's be smart in writing the projects in whatever project you are most comfortable with. But to answer you short, yes, having GitHub does help, and pushing the right information, pushing the things in which you are most comfortable with, that will be the best scenario. That will be an ideal scenario to have.
All right. Thanks a lot, Arpit. Thank you for your time. And also thanks to all the viewers and learners who had given their valuable opinions and questions to Arpit. I'm sure all of you must have found this session very encouraging. So thank you again, Arpit. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Totally my pleasure.
Sure.